I am Adam Ramsey from openDemocracy, and we're going to have a really interesting discussion for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the future of Palestine. Obviously, the context, I think, is maybe clear to everyone, but we've got three really interesting speakers for you, and I can see the numbers of arrivals ticking up. I've had lots of questions submitted, many more than we can get through in the hour that we have. And so I've sort of grouped them into themes, and I'm going to try and put those themes to our panelists. And I think a lot of what we're going to try and do is sort of understand like what's new, what's changed. And so I can see people still arriving, still numbers ticking up. So we're not going to get going quite yet. But when we do, I'm going to go to Isaam first, because he was just explaining to us that there's such an electricity crisis in Palestine at the moment that he's had to charge up his laptop from a private generator and it might die at any moment. So hopefully we'll get to hear from him. But perhaps Olivia give me a shout when she thinks we're ready to go. Or are we ready to go? Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. For those of you who weren't here when I said this before, I'm Adam Ramsey. I'm an editor at openDemocracy. I am here in rainy Edinburgh. And we're going to be talking tonight about Palestine and what's happening there at the moment. And rather than kind of rambling at you, I'm just going to get my three panelists tonight to talk. And I'm going to start by asking them to introduce themselves, but also explain, you know, what's going on where they are right now or with their families right now. And I'm going to start with Isaam Adwan. Isaam.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Isaam Adwan. I'm 27. I live in Gaza. I work as a freelance journalist and the project manager of We Are Not Numbers. A little bit of background about my work with We Are Not Numbers, because it's the reason why I am here. So basically, We're Not Numbers, as the name suggests, it's a project it tends to tell the untold stories behind numbers in the news. We believe that the Palestinian story has been losing for the past 73 years the humanized perspective to justify the existence of the people, to try to show them as people, because we believe in the concept that in order to understand the suffering of people, you should see them as people first. For the past 5 years, we started, of course, after the war of 2014 on Gaza, in 2015 precisely, and for the past 5 years, we have been able to produce about 1,000 articles of human stories about ourselves and about others as well, of dead people, injured, amputations, and also trying to document the other perspectives that you don't read anything about, you don't hear anything about, the life perspective, the hope, the love, music, anything that people feel alive through. And we also produced more than 35 short documentaries, including 2 longer versions of them, won international awards. We have also published lately in 2019, we published a book in Germany, and we contributed to several books sharing the stories of people, especially the people of Gaza. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. And for those of you watching, as you'll see, there's a chat box, and I can see that on the right. So if you have any questions you want to ask live, then do just put them in there. If you're watching on Facebook, then you can add them in the comments below, and they will be fed back through to me so I can see those as well. Thank you, Isaam, for that introduction. You're in Gaza now?
Yeah, I live in Rafah, the southern city of the Gaza Strip. It's like a city. It contains like 250,000 of residents, and we don't have a main hospital. We have faced many humanitarian crises, especially in Rafah during the war of 2008, 2012, and 2014, and still we're facing the same.
And can you just quickly, you know, tell us about your daily experience of the conflict at the moment? You know, what's your day been like today? What's the last week been like for you?
Yeah, I hope my experience and my suffering is not something to generalize over the suffering of the people, because in so many different levels, my suffering is way better than 90% or even 90% and 99% of the other population of Gaza. So imagine a situation where 2 million people are put in this 365 square kilometers with an absolute policy to suffocate their existence. I mean, medical equipment expertise are barely entering Gaza. water is undrinkable, food is barely found, and poverty is eating people alive. Unemployment rate is increasing day by day, and there is no hope in the political horizon. So people are desperate, and they have been living this, I would say, cycle of death for the past 15 years. They don't have hope. They don't have faith in the international community. They don't have faith they don't have faith in the ICC, and all these facts, they are trying. Despite all these facts, they are trying to live their life in peace and with dignity. But what we have been encountering so far, including myself, of those experiences that were being bargained from time to time, especially those years of 2008, the war of 2008, 2012, and 2014, and now 2021, we are being bargained to remain silent for those continuous human rights violations and continuous land grabbing and uprooting of Palestinians and Palestinian identity. Not only the genocide that Gaza has been facing for the past 15 years, and I'm talking about the slow death policy, but I'm talking about a literal genocide, putting those people like in the largest open air prison. So we are trying, this bargaining is that it stays like this, and how I feel it feels like this, that if you remain silent, you will be granted generously by Israel those crumbs of rights. So whenever we are defending ourselves, whenever we are shouting, I would say out loud, the best we can, to announce that we're dying slowly, we are accused of being terrorists. We are accused of being terrorists. Either we protested, for instance, during 2018, during the Great March of Return, we are terrorists, and we are encountered with live ammunition, explosive bullets, tear gas, and so many other ways of that supposedly considered internationally prohibited, and it's considered war crimes. Still, whenever we are defending our existence, whenever we're defending our families, brothers and sisters in Sheikh Jarrah, then a war happened again in Gaza. This is the cycle of death, which my people, including myself, I consider it cynical, because it's not changing at all. We're living the same circumstances, but there is a significant, and unfortunately, there is a significant blood thrive by the Israeli administration from war to war. We're witnessing more brutality, more targeting of civilians, and to the context of this war, especially, you can notice if you're following the news that they are intentionally targeting large buildings, residential towers, which contain of at least 40 to 50 families, and which left for the very first days 400, 500 families homeless, and now of an estimated number of 5,000 of 52,000 people homeless. They don't know, they don't have any shelter to go, they don't have any food to feed their children, they don't have drinkable water, and so many other I would say humanitarian crises. Not to remark the war itself, and this is the last part of my presentation, not to remark the war itself, Gaza has been facing those harsh circumstances other than the days and the years of war. We have been dying slowly, and we have been bargained to remain silent for those peace moments, I would say. And it's not peace at all. Those peace moments to live, for those people to breathe a little bit, aside from feeling death. We have seen also a significant increase of suicide rate, which also remarks and signifies that people are desperate, people are hopeless, people are helpless as well. And this is the life of people in Gaza. Those are the human rights violations we are encountering and we're facing and we're living day by day for the past 15 years. And I believe all the Palestinians in the West Bank or the occupied territories and in the diaspora, they have also human rights violations, which the Israeli administration has been practicing since 1948.
Thank you, Sam. Just for our audience, Olivia has been sharing some of the articles we published on Open Democracy over the last couple of weeks, including about Gaza, where Isaam is based. And Muna, if we could come to you next. Again, can you just introduce yourself, tell us, what's brought you here, and how the last few days and weeks have played out for you, and what you think our audience should understand.
Thank you, Adam and Olivia, for organizing this. My name is Muna, and I'm a Jerusalemite. I'm from Sheikh Jarrah. My grandparents' house is in Sheikh Jarrah. It's one of the houses that's facing expulsion, as you might have heard in the news in the past few weeks. with the families braving and really trying to defend their place in Jerusalem and their roots. So I'm from that community, and I'm now based in the UK. I'm an academic, and I work in the fields of water and environmental justice.
And you know, looking at events over the last few days, you know, you heard already from Isaam about that sense you can often have when watching events in Palestine of a kind of continuous cycle. So what would you say feels new to you in this? You know, how is this different from previous rounds of violence, both positively and negatively?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, you know, for Palestinians, as Isaam mentioned, you know, these moments of heightened escalations that happen in Palestine do not really signify that on other days things are normal. They're actually far beyond normal. We live under a settler colonial rule, and settler colonial rule basically implies and is actually an everyday acts of violence that are committed against us in every aspect of our life, whether on a personal, on a community level, and on a political level. We find in Jerusalem, for instance, our spaces of existence shrinking day by day. We are surrounded by the apartheid walls, disconnecting us from the rest of the West Bank. In East Jerusalem, we are facing a heightened attack on us from settlement expansions in the city, where it happens that they take a house after house through forgery and theft of these houses, like we see in Sheikh Jarrah. Our case in Sheikh Jarrah is not unique. It's actually the case that really characterizes the lived reality of Jerusalemite Palestinians. It happens everywhere in different neighborhoods, whether in Silwan, in the Old City, and many other neighborhoods that are facing the threat of Judaization, meaning that it's part of Israel and the Jerusalem municipality's plans to maintain a demographic majority in Jerusalem. They want a Jewish majority of 70% and a Palestinian minority. So how do you achieve that if the Palestinian community is growing? In the Jerusalemite, the Palestinian community is growing is actually through policies that aim to actually dispossess you of your land, dispossess you of your residency and your right to be in the city. And this is how Israel has acted in this occupied territory since 1967. My family has been in Jerusalem for generations, and today, but in the eyes of the Israeli state, we are mere residents. We are just a block in the way of reaching this Judaized city. And the story of Sheikh Jarrah is a story of the Nakba, of the 1948 dispossession that the Palestinians have faced and are still facing until today, because we are not delving and we're not going back and saying, oh, the Nakba is happening and we're bringing history out. The Nakba is actually an ongoing reality for all Palestinians. They experience it in different ways because Israel has fragmented us. And we have different political, geographical realities on the ground that where this settler colonial state is really trying to deal with Palestinians in a different way. I'm sure Nadim will speak about it as a Palestinian living inside Israel. Isaam has just told you really eloquently how he faces it with in a geography that has been coerced into being put into this besieged state for 15 years and counting. And the whole process, this fragmentation that Israel has done to all the territories of historic Palestine, actually meant to deter us, to make our identity fragmented as well, where I'm a Jerusalemite, I will care about issues in Jerusalem only, and I will see other struggles like the struggle in Gaza and the siege as something, you know, external to my own. But I think what these recent mobilizations that we're seeing, and we're really finding hope in them because they have really united again the Palestinian front and the mobilization, and kind of really sent a message not only to Palestinians themselves, but to, you know, to the world that, you know, the Palestinian people have always been united. They have never been fragmented, and they will continue to be. And this kind of really is a great turn for our struggle for the next decades to come, I hope. So that's how I see it. I see it, it's unprecedented, but I also wanted just to highlight that where the credit lies. Maybe you'll ask that in a bit, Adam, but the credit lies, for all people who are working on the ground tirelessly, from activists to researchers to civil society, and lots of people who have really worked tirelessly to make this reality happen today. Because if we rely on the Palestinian Authority, or if we rely on these political structures that have been developed after the Oslo Accord, if we rely even on the international community and aid agencies, they have proven that they have that their efforts have been really not on the same trajectory as what the Palestinian people wanted. The Palestinian people have always wanted unity, and this is what we're seeing today with this great mobilization.
And Nadeem, obviously, this movement, this mobilization that we've started to see has been a large part of that is taking place on social media. And I know that that's something that you've been looking at closely, and you wrote today for openDemocracy about sort of social media apartheid. So I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, tell us, roughly where you are, but also about that work and why that's relevant to this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Adam. So my name is Nadeem Nashif. I'm the director of Hamle. Hamle is a center for the protection and promotion of Palestinian digital rights. I live in Haifa. We in Hamle work throughout all historical Palestine to defend Palestinian digital rights. We basically monitor and research different aspects of Palestinian digital rights, whether it comes from different governmental stakeholders who are trying to control the internet and to control freedom of expression, especially when it comes from the Israeli occupation government. That's trying to do that in many different ways. But we also go through the policies and especially the content moderation policies of Facebook and the other social media platforms. We monitor that, we appeal regarding certain cases of what they are doing, especially in these days as we see a huge volume of takedowns on the social media that's happening. Some of them because of American laws, some of them because the formal Israeli government cyber unit is pushing for that, and some other parts because different troll groups, Israeli troll groups who are reporting, mass reporting and abusing the system of reporting of social media on Palestinian content, in most of the cases without even understanding what's written there. And the result is that we are right now living in a context of war on narrative. From one hand, suppressing the Palestinian narrative on the social media, not allowing us to express ourselves, to speak about ourselves, being the victim from one hand, but the victim cannot speak about what's happening to him. We cannot even document the human rights violations that is happening in Sheikh Jarrah and in other places. Social media, as we all know, is very important to broadcast, to have the live there. And there is a huge pressure on the social media companies to suppress these voices. And this is what we all saw what's happened in Sheikh Jarrah, and regarding hashtags, mainly on Instagram, taking down.
What happened? Yeah.
Sorry, Adam, can you repeat?
You said we all saw. Can you just explain to us what happened with Instagram?
Yes, so basically in that weekend, since Wednesday, we had huge amounts of takedowns. Basically, the part of the work of Hamle that we monitor what's happened on the social media, and we get requests from people that they encounter problems or shutdowns, etc. And there was a big, huge volume of takedowns concentrating around Sheikh Jarrah issue from people inside and outside Palestine, but specifically inside Palestine, in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, from the activists who were there. And not only accounts and content, but for the first time, even hashtags. So hashtags were also suppressed. I mean, if you looked for hashtag Al-Aqsa, you could not find it. A few hashtags of Sheikh Jarrah were also disappearing. So later on, the communication department of Instagram issued some kind of explanation saying that there was a glitch and it's a global thing, etc. Obviously, it was not, and obviously these are, lame excuses. I mean, global glitch specifically about Al-Aqsa hashtag doesn't really sound very logical. And specifically about Sheikh Jarrah from all the globe, like, I mean, how this fixed. So clearly, it's an Israeli pressure on them. We know that in the background, the Israeli cyber unit is sitting on this and working. We know that there is what's so-called voluntary takedowns, which means basically requests. I mean, what the process is, just for everybody to understand, is that basically all the secret service agencies of Israel are surveilling Palestinian social media. Then they send requests to the Israeli cyber unit, which sits in the Israeli Ministry of Justice. This unit cooperates with all social media. They are the focal point from the side of Israel with the social media companies. They request to them takedowns. They then send every year like tens of thousands of takedowns requests. By this unit officials, 90% of those requests are positively replied. Now, when there is a tension or clashes happening, obviously the amount of these requests is, according to the official yesterday or the day before, he said, now we have multiplied 5 times our request to the Facebook. So basically, the problem is that even by the Israeli legal system, there is no legal ground for this because it's a voluntary takedown. It's not that there is a court who discussed this, not that I believe in Israeli courts, but let's say there's no due process, there is no legal process around this. It's just somebody sitting and it's writing an email, and almost automatically the post is being removed. Now, from our experience, that in many cases we appeal, the accounts come back, and then they say, okay, this is false positive, and this kind of, it was a technical problem, it's a human error, etc., etc. The issue is not about the specifics. The issue is about the whole system is built in a way that if you are the strong side, the more organized side, the wealthy side, you will win and you will be able to suppress the other side, the occupied, the weaker side narrative on the social media. And by the way, this is not only Palestine, Israel. This is also happening in Kashmir, India. This is happening to the Rohingya in Myanmar and in many other cases around the globe. And this is part of this system where Facebook is leaning towards rich, influential governments rather than giving an open, free, safe platform for everybody around the globe.
Thank you, Nadim. And Michael Rowe has asked a question about the recent bombing of Al Jazeera and the Associated Press in Gaza. And I suppose that I'd like to reframe that question slightly and ask, if you look at those two things together, the bombing of media buildings in Gaza, and also what you described going on with social media and suppression of particular narratives. And I should say that my experience of using Facebook the last time I was in the West Bank was different from using it anywhere else in the world. And that what you say very much chimes with my experience. But when we look at the those two things together, the bombing of the offices of the traditional press and the suppressing of narratives on social media, what do you think that tells us about Israeli strategy in the current context?
Is this a question for me?
Sorry, I was asking Nadim again, but we can go around. I'll come back to you in a second, Isaam.
Yes, I mean, again, I think this is part of the attempt to silence the Palestinian voices and not to allow them, whether it's classic mainstream media, whether it's on the level of social media. We know our sister organization, Palestiniyat, their office in Gaza was also attacked and destroyed. We know, and this organization work with women journalists. We know about many journalists who has been attacked. We know about journalists who were arrested because of doing their job. We know about journalists who have been injured. So the silencing effort is going on in all fronts, unfortunately. And this is why it's important also to keep saying and to keep the struggle to have an open channel, especially, and this is overemphasizing also the need for the social media and decentralizing the media for the people also to tell their story directly from Gaza, from Sheikh Jarrah to the rest of the world, because in many cases also this is not happening. The other side of it is basically having mainstream media outlets that are not telling the right story, that are not telling at least two sides of the story, like New York Times and others, which are to be considered as a kind of liberal media outlets, but unfortunately in such times they take one biased step.
And thank you for that, Nadim. And Isaam, I'm keen to get your views. Obviously, Gaza has, particularly in the last week, as often is, been at the center of a lot of global debate and kind of social movement organizing. And I'd love your perspective on what's changed, you think, in terms of kind of your perception of that international conversation. You know, does it feel different now from before? Do you feel a change in how much solidarity you experience, etc.?
Yeah, of course. And I would like to assure what Nadim just told you, that we have witnessed for the past 73 years that Israel has the full impunity towards those human rights violations in Gaza, in the West Bank, in the occupied territories, or even towards the Palestinians in the diaspora. So recognizing this part of the issue necessitated the Palestinians to look forward of other approaches, to explore more ways of how to deliver the Palestinian narrative properly, without any manipulations, without any censoring, as what happens nowadays on social media. That is why we are trying to use social media in the, I would say, in the safest ways, to try to avoid being banned, to try to avoid being terminated, to try to avoid being censored. That is why the such shifting or dependence on the social media to deliver the Palestinian narrative has increased the publicity of the Palestinian cause among the international community. Now we're witnessing people are campaigning, people are protesting, especially in the US and in the UK. People are demanding the governments, at the very least, to cut the funds going to help this occupation and to fund this occupation and this inhumane crisis that has been going for the past 73 years. So this awareness did not happen by coincidence, and I would like to make sure that this is understood. It's not happening by coincidence. We have been paying for the past 73 years heavy prices with our blood, with our children, with our lands, with our safety, and so many other things that we lost so far. We have been paying this for the international community to listen to us, for the ICC to start looking at the files and the cases we are filing, to criminalize Israel, to impose sanctions on. So this has resulted for the international community to realize that they have never been abided by the responsibilities and the morals they called for.
And Muna, I see you nodding there, but how would you say that your experience of the kind of international perception of the Palestine situation has changed in recent years?
I just want to say that, as Isaam mentioned, for decades, you know, the mainstream media, that was kind of our only channel to kind of voice our voices and our experiences to the world, has been heavily biased. There's been a domination of narrative by Israel, and you see it until today. Still, mainstream media, like when they host Palestinians, they're still kind of asking these very racist and degrading questions, where they ask you if does Israel have the right to self-defense, or whether we actually accept violence. And I think what we've seen is that Palestinians are the one now who's coming and actually demanding that change of narrative, demanding that the language we use to speak with Palestinians is different. And I cannot but commend, you know, the great voices that I'm sure a lot of people have seen in the mainstream media coming and saying that this is our narrative. You're asking us to come on live on TV to express to share our experiences, and we want to make sure that the language you use and the narrative you use is a narrative of freedom and justice, and not just a narrative of but like neutral or like showing both sides, because I think we've had enough of that, as Isaam said, for like the last 7 decades. So this domination of narrative is changing. Of course, as Nadim mentioned, with the limitations of social media, we still see so much potential. Like we've seen how in Sheikh Jarrah, Mona al-Kurd and Muhammad al-Kurd have actually like started the storm of Save Sheikh Jarrah hashtag that has reached thousands and hundreds and thousands and even millions around the world, you know. So I think we see potential of people telling their voices. What Isaam is mentioning about we are not numbers is also such a powerful, you know, project, because it is showing and allowing people to say it, to voice their opinion, their experiences about what they're going through of settler colonial practices. So in a way, I think it's great, you know, that this is happening. There still needs to be so much more done, as Nadim has mentioned, to kind of overcome those these companies being complicit with the powerful, with the hegemonic forces and settler colonial states that want to, you know, dismiss our voices and to silence those voices that are saying the truth. But just, yeah, saying that, also witnessing, you know, how solidarity has changed. I think what is really important to highlight as well is, and what Palestinian voices have been saying also now loud and clear, is that we want Palestinian solidarity not when we are victims of Israeli aggressions, but we also want solidarity when we resist. And we want solidarity and collaboration, and to understand that we're in a common struggle when we are resisting in the way that we find suitable for our cause. So I think this is really important. So, and I think this is really shifting as well. If you see a lot of statements coming out of academic institutions and cultural institutions and so on and so forth, where they're actually explicitly saying that we also support Palestinians in the right to self-defense, in the right to resist. And I think this is really a very important change. So again, the narrative of victimhood is no longer dominant, and also the narrative, the Israeli narrative of self-defense is also weakening day by day as we speak, because of all of these great efforts on the ground.
And if we're seeing a shift, as you describe, in kind of narrative and a lot of international public opinion, do you think that's likely to shift kind of geopolitics? Are we going to see any change in the policies of the American, British governments, etc., in coming years, do you think?
I think, yeah, that's a difficult one, because, yeah, definitely, I think we need to keep pushing. And I think that's what Isaam is also alluding to, that at the end, great to have solidarity of the people, because I think this gives such momentum and such force to our struggle. But how do we continue? We have to push for sanctions. We have to push for accountability. And this is what we're saying: no more of condemnation and concern and all of these messages that people in decision-making power in the United Nations, in the General Council and Security Council, different big superpowers are talking about concern, are talking about, you know, that they care for human life and that all lives are important. And I think this narrative is really being challenged, and we should all continue to challenge it from wherever we are. So if we need to, we have to call, we have to push, we have to protest, we have to make sure that this is not just solidarity when things escalate, and that we forget about it the next day when when relative calm in the eyes of the Western world is reached. Palestinians will continue to live under settler colonialism, even when we're not featuring in your daily news. So I think what we need to do is we keep urging and pushing for sanctions, very clearly, accountability and sanctions. We need to ensure that settler colonialism ends for us to be able to see a future that we want for our children.
And Isaam, on the subject of kind of the international influence on what's happening, particularly in Gaza, one of the questions we had from a viewer was about the role of the Egyptian government in particular, and what Egypt could and should be doing differently in the current context. I wonder if you'd like to talk about that.
It's really difficult. It's really difficult to depend on the Arab countries, especially what we have been witnessing for the past 10 years, especially the last 10 years. We have been seeing movements towards normalizing with Israel. So I would say the clear and cloud that Israel wouldn't dare to bomb Gaza or to violate all these human rights without a cooperation, either with acknowledgement or not, without a cooperation with the Arab countries, especially with Egypt. And I can give you one example and one experience. I denied my travel several times throughout Eretz crossing, which is the border crossing between Gaza and Israel. So it's because of Israel. But I was also denied to travel through Egypt. The only time that I was allowed to travel, because the Carter Center in 2019 selected me to represent Palestine as the first international observer, because there is a high power demanding them to give me my right. So either we see it or not for the international community, either they acknowledge it or not, there is a contribution of our countries within this inhumane system and within this colonial system. There are so many reasons to explain about that, because they are demanding and they are trying to get close to Israel because they want to be close to the US. It's a whole different topic, but let's say it and let's clarify it that Palestine has been left alone for the past 73 years with an absolute policy, with an absolute silence, and turning blind eye and deaf ear towards our suffering. And not only that, funds of the US, $3.8 billion going to fund the Israeli occupation forces. And not only that, they have been providing full impunity for the international community and the ICC to Israel to be protected for those human rights violations. The targeting of civilians and the targeting of media international agencies is not something new. For instance, I protested during the Great March of Return back in 2018, and clearly showing vests and written press, they targeted and killed several of my friends, journalist friends. For instance, Yasser Murtaja, he clearly showed, you can see that on video, still, it's still happening. You can see that he clearly showed a press vest, still, he was shot in the chest and he died. And other members as well. Now we are seeing the same policy as it happens long ago in Gaza, in Sheikh Jarrah, in East Jerusalem, in the occupied territories, and everywhere. It's just a policy of suppressing the voices of Palestinians in every norm possible. We are seeing that on social media. We are seeing now during the current aggressions on Gaza. We are seeing this during the peaceful protests in Sheikh Jarrah and all over Palestine. It's a mentality. It also signifies the most important part, that Israel has full impunity towards all these war crimes. So what has changed? And I would like to add to Mana's point, what has changed of this awareness? That the US, especially the US citizens, they started to acknowledge that they are part of this racist regime, because their taxes are paying, their government is supporting them. That is why we're seeing now a little bit of increase and awareness by the US citizens that they are part of this inhumane system. That is why we're seeing all over the US, they're now protesting and demanding. And it resulted, as you can see for the past 2 days, Alexandria Cortez and Bernie Sanders, they are delivering statements to cancel the weapons deal of $735 million that should be provided in the coming days to bomb Gaza. So those are clear indications and facts to the importance of those solidarity that we're witnessing, of those protests, especially in the US and the UK, because they are the main contributors to this inhumane occupation for so long.
Thank you, Isaam. And Nadim, we've had a lot of questions in about what people around in the rest of the world can do about what's happening to Palestinians. And obviously, a lot of that is related to what you've talked about in particular with regard to suppression of narrative and story. So I was wondering if you could just give us a sense of your answer to that question. What could people in our audience do about the problems you highlight?
Yes, I think it's important to follow some credible sources in different areas and fields in Palestine, and to share this narrative and to share their media production. I think this is very important because in many cases, we, the people who fight for this just struggle, we kind of fall into these echo chambers where we basically speak with our own cycles without making any kind of breakthrough. It's important to speak to media outlets at this time. They are being pressured heavily from the other side. It's important to speak to politicians, to social media companies, to their presence on the online. They are very sensitive to those issues, to journalists regarding their coverage when they don't cover enough, and obviously to use social media to raise awareness of the people. This is very important. It's important also to do it in a good way, that it's not counter effect or backfiring, as unfortunately some people does it. I think the Palestinian cause is a just cause. We're looking for justice. There's no need for any kind of materials or phrasing that really can do counter work. And I think it's important to look at it. Maybe there's one side of it that was not really discussed here. That this whole aggression is the aggression of settlers. It's important to look at the Israeli society in the last decade and to see how much it went to the right wing side. I mean, the left in Israel was erased totally. There's hardly some merits people, like a couple of them in the Knesset, who also define themselves as a Zionist, but at least like the people who can speak about two-state solution are maybe 4 or 5 parliament members. The rest, because I saw in the chat that some people are still speaking about the vast majority of the Israeli society are not talking about this at all. It's not relevant for them. They don't want that. They want to manage the reality. They want to overcome and control as much land as possible to keep the siege in a way or another on Gaza, so it would be manageable, to erase any kind of identity from Palestinians of 48, so they are not allowed to celebrate and to be part of their Palestinian identity. The only accepted way for you as Arab Palestinian citizen of Israel is basically when you delete your Palestinian identity and you only speak about very concrete issues or rights on a daily basis. Even then, you will not get them. And we have to look at it as a regime that was built for many years in a sophisticated way, not to say that it's an apartheid regime, but to manage things in a way that would be kind of sophisticated. And in the last decade or two, when it's a power game between the right and the far right, like who would be controlling, and all of them are right now far right. But if we take zoom in on the issues that were happening, what happened in Sheikh Jarrah is part of the settler movement. Their companies, their own NGOs, that they recruit money, they try to control, they falsificate documentation, but the same thing that they are doing in Lid, in Ramsey, in Jaffa. By the way, in Jaffa, there was similar tension before. I don't know, maybe it didn't get the attention to the international media. Similarly, in Haifa, in Acre. So all of these coastal cities, mixed cities, apparently the settlers had enough, or they feel that they are enough strong in the West Bank. Now they want to strengthen the Jewish identity of Lid and of Jaffa, as it was not enough. And again, to control. They are using bureaucratic issues of control, and that many houses are basically houses of Palestinians that somehow the government, because of land confiscation, house confiscation after 1948, so these houses are owned by the government, and the Palestinians who are living in them, they have a long lease. Now the government is selling the houses to cooperatives and companies that belong to the settlers, and the settlers, through some kind of legal tricks, they are trying to control them, and basically, again, to do ethnic cleansing for Palestinians. And if somebody was thinking like, yes, there could be a Palestinian state in 67, and in Israel proper, there's okay situation. So it's not, it's the same apartheid regime, it's the same settlers, the same bodies who are controlling over land and houses in Jerusalem, in the West Bank, the same ones who want annexation and to in the West Bank, they are operating similarly in 48 areas. So it's important to see it in the larger picture, that it's in the end of the day, there is one regime and there are maybe different levels of suffer and discrimination, where our brothers and sisters in Gaza suffer much more on this huge daily oppression and with the wars, and in the West Bank in certain system, and again, Jerusalemites are more now similar to 48ers, but in the end of the day, it's one government who's doing all of this, and there should be a solution, a just solution for everybody.
Thank you, Nadeem. I'm going to come to Muna in a second, but I've got a couple of quick announcements first. So the first is that next week's discussion has the title Football Fans versus Billionaires, Who Owns the Beautiful Game? I'm assuming that's because St Johnstone Football Club are on course to win the Scottish Double, which of course is a headline event all around the world, or certainly in my household. But that's next week. Come and join us for that. Also, we've had shared in the chat another great piece published on Open Democracy recently about Israeli mobs attacking Palestinians, and how that's really essentially part of the policy of occupation, and you can't really understand that separately from the broader policy. But Muna, you talked earlier about the, and Nadeem also referred to this just now, the kind of recent social movements that have started growing up across Palestine. And I just wonder if you could tell us why you seem to think that's different from what you've seen in the past, and what's new there, why that's something to be excited about, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe I will tell you from like a Jerusalem perspective. Why is it exciting in a way? But because in Jerusalem, like as I mentioned before, the situation on the ground, as I mentioned, on a daily basis, it's deteriorating so bad, and people's actually even access to public space has been completely controlled by Israel. If we talk about Damascus Gate, you know, the place where Palestinians actually feel they belong. It's the heart of the city. It's where the Palestinian identity is really clear. Has been under, you know, the threat of being like turned into kind of a zone for where you have constant presence of the army and the police. Now you have watchtowers where Israeli soldiers intimidate and harass Palestinians, and also take them to prison as well. Like, and that's the reality. You see that how it's been happening in Jerusalem is that every time there is an escalation of violence, there is an attack on these places of worship like Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the limiting of people entering to the Old City during the Orthodox Easter holiday, and so many events that happen on a daily basis. So under these conditions where you know that you're under threat all the time, your identity is under threat, as Nadeem mentioned. You have violence against you. You have laws and policies that want to expel you from your city. Settlers that come and change, you know, they steal your houses and change the narrative. So in this moment in time, the frustration is really heightened. But at the same time, what we saw, like, why is it different, is because once the escalations of these everyday violence happened in Jerusalem, we saw that everybody in Palestine mobilized, not just because Jerusalem is this political center, it's also because it symbolizes, you know, the Palestinian presence on the land. It's at the heart of the Palestinian struggle. So I think this what gives hope, is that people are mobilizing. They're like leaving behind all the reasons they're fragmented and coming together. And I think in Sheikh Jarrah also it's very symbolic, because I think everybody, when they saw this court decision, the unlawful court decision that is going to expel families from their houses that they've been living there since the 50s, people actually saw the Nakba, you know, saw the catastrophe that their grandparents and parents have told them about and have narrated to them. And I think this has also sparked that. And I think this is where, you know, this struggle is intergenerational. This is where where I see hope is that our struggle is, just as Nadeem mentioned, our struggle is intergenerational. It will continue. And our memory is alive. You know, this is something that we want to keep ongoing. I saw somebody in the chat asking about, you know, land ownership, and this is an argument that people are saying, you know, well maybe Sheikh Jarrah is a land dispute, and I just want to refute that very strongly and say that even settler organizations have presented false evidence saying that this land belongs to them. And I think if we even take that as evidence, which the lawyers have looked at and found to be forged. But if we do take that as evidence and think about, that power and that hegemony of this apartheid state in claiming lands back while denying the same right for Palestinians, I think this clearly shows the apartheid nature of this state. One set of rules for a group and another for Palestinians. And this is where this just cause has come up and risen and has expanded and all around Palestine, all over the world. I've never thought in my life that Sheikh Jarrah, my grandparents' house and that compound will actually make headline news. And I think this is in a way, thanks again to all of the people on the ground who have been working and exposing what's happening on the ground. So this is where I see hope. I think seeing hope that our causes and are just, and as I said, Sheikh Jarrah is not the only one. So I hope that people also understand this situation happens in Palestine all the time, and we need to amplify all of these stories and make sure that they also reach worldwide. And for us to kind of really claim back our state.
And we've also had a bunch of questions, which I think tie into this a fair amount, about Palestinian leadership. And I suppose part of the context that we can see this happening in is what you might describe as a failure of Palestinian leadership, as in the Palestinian Authority, etc., is struggling. There's been an election postponed for, we don't have time to talk about why or debate why. But what do you think that leadership could be doing differently, but also how do you think this new social movement is likely to change that dynamic?
Sorry, that's for you, Muna, or for me?
Sure,
sorry.
I was asking Muna, but you're welcome to answer instead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Muna.
Okay. I just wanted to say that also based on some of the questions and the things about two-state solution. And I think I just wanted to also clarify that, this Palestinian mobilization is actually showing us Palestinians who were maybe a small group that are still like illusional about a two-state solution, and of course the Palestinian Authority. But it also showed the world that that Palestinians are not after a two-state solution, because we live in Palestine and we know that this two-state solution is an illusion. The Oslo Accords is a total failure. We knew that all along, but we really don't understand how the international community and those actors really think that this is something that they aspire to. I think in a lot of condemnation and concern letters, they kind of pledge, that they are still committed to a two-state solution. And I think this is where you want to hear it from Palestinians who live on the ground, that this two-state solution is a total illusional. The situation we have on the ground is an apartheid state, as Nadim mentioned, controlling Palestinians under different levels, with different restrictions on movement, on freedom of expression, on the right to be on the land, and this is the situation on the ground, and that's really as clear as crystal clear. So yes, in a way, like it makes the Oslo Accords and all of the aid that is centered around this rule of law and governance really obsolete, and really kind of tells us that Palestinians are paving a different way, and it's the youth, it's the people who are looking forward for a truly decolonial reality. We want to actually move beyond this settler colonial reality, and we want to achieve a true decolonial situation.
Cool. We've got to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but Isaam, we've had both Nadim and Muna have given us their clear view on that kind of broader question of two states, one multinational state, etc. So do you want to weigh in on that? And what are your thoughts on the sort of idea often mooted internationally of a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine question?
Well, it's a very long debate, but I can say one simple sentence that the Zionism vision only identifies that there is no existence for Arabs and Palestinians, and that's it. Either we're talking about one-state solution, two-state solution, they've never been an option that are proposed to Palestinians, especially the two-state solution, the myth of this two-state solution, which is debunked only 3-4 months after, which Israel continued the land grabbing, the implementation of checkpoints, the imprisonment, killing of including children and women. So we're talking about a myth that has never been a solution. And talking about the tips, because I believe part of your last question to Nadeem was about what could be done to help the Palestinians. And I will provide a few tips how to help the Palestinians. First, stop being ignorant, because we have been dying for the past 73 years to educate the international community about our suffering. So at the very least, have the decency and the courtesy to read about our suffering. And the second part, which is the most important part, and now we're witnessing a significant shifting of that listen to the stories of Palestinians from Palestinians. So it's really nonsense to listen to those sufferers and to listen to those experiences from a U.S. journalist or whatever journalist, wherever he or she lives, that knows nothing about our suffering and knows nothing on the ground of the realities of life in Gaza, for instance. The third important part, and I believe it's really identified lately for the past 10 years, and it clarifies the importance of how you can show solidarity to Palestinians, is to boycott. BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And this is the safest way. So if you don't know that those Israeli products that you're paying is contributing of 70%, of at least 70%, going straight to fund the Israeli occupation, now you know. So at the very least, don't buy Israeli products. And the fourth important part is amplifying the organizations such as the Hamla, the We Are Not Members, and so many other organizations on the ground, because we are suffering so many obstacles to get those stories to you. We're suffering to implement projects and create networking with several organizations around the world. And we're trying to overcome those obstacles. And without your help, attempting to create such important networking, we will fail with our endeavors to deliver those messages to you. I believe those tips will help you to, at the very least. And the last part, and I mentioned it before, and it's really important. Now, the protesting and solidarity, it is really important. It is really important. We are dying here, and without your efforts, our death means nothing to the international community. I don't mean on the ground. We're dying here. Our children, as you might be witnessing images and videos, especially to the people of Gaza. Now you can witness it. Children and women are dying. Entire buildings are bombed with residents inside. So at the very least, what you have to do, especially if you are a US citizen or living in the UK, you have to identify that you are part of the problem. So at the very least, go to question your governments where your taxes are paid.
Thank you, Isaam. Nadeem, have you got any last words, one sentence to wrap us up?
Yeah, I think it's important also to see the intersectionality and the connection between struggles. I think the solidarity movement in the US specifically has been working on also linking the Palestinian cause with different other just struggles inside the US and outside the US. I think it's important to see things in a wider global perspective for what kind of world we want to live in. A world with human rights, with justice for people, with equality, with transparency. And if those are the values that are guiding us, so obviously we should be also caring about what's happening in Palestine for the Palestinian people, to have also these values and these possibilities equally as the rest of the people on the globe.
Thank you. And Muna, one last sentence. You're muted.
Yes, one last sentence. Yeah, like I also kind of echo Nadeem and Isaam's word, like, yes, we need action, but we also need to ensure, yeah, that Palestine is a global struggle for justice. It's not only about Palestinians themselves, it's also about kind of a global human cry for justice and freedom. And this is why we need to be working on this together and to kind of transcend, you know, these divides that the settler colonial regimes have imposed on us. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. I feel really lucky because as a journalist, I get to work for a wonderful media outlet, for openDemocracy, which, you know, I think we like to believe that there is such a thing as objective reality, and rather than just giving you two sides of an abstract debate, we attempt to get to the truth. And having spent time going to Palestine myself, I feel like it's very clear that there's an objective reality that there is an apartheid state. I've been down roads that Palestinians are not allowed down. And I feel very privileged to work for a media outlet which allows me to say that and doesn't insist that I give equal voice to kind of those with power and those without it. And if you like that kind of journalism, please do contribute to it. We don't exist without your funding. There is a funding link in the chat, so please chip in what you can. And many thanks so much to all of our panelists and to everyone for joining us. And do join us again next week for our discussion about the future of football. Thank you very much.
Thank you.